Good morning and a very warm welcome to today's Sustainability Network Speaker Series event brought to you by Cranfield University. I'm Dr. Rosina Watson. I'm Associate Professor in Sustainability and Head of Cranfield's School of Management's Sustainable Business Group. So the Sustainability Network Speaker Series, some of you are regular attendees. You know that this is an informal network of practitioners, students, faculty, who come together to discuss hot topics in the field of sustainability and business. And today's Sustainability Network series will be discussing the really important question of, can my money help save the planet? And today's session is really important and special for two reasons. First of all, we have an absolutely amazing guest speaker joining us today, who is Dan Sherrard-Smith, CEO and founder of MotherTree. And the other way that today's session is special is that it is a student takeover edition of the series, which means that one of our fantastic students from our full-time MSc in Management and Corporate Sustainability is running the show today. She is called Shri Chanukar, and I will hand over to her now to take us to the next part of the session. Away you go, Shri.
Thank you, Rosina, and hello everyone. I'm Shri from the MSc in Management and Corporate Sustainability program here at Cranfield. A warm welcome to everyone who's really joined us, and a special thanks to all of the students who've made it through their lunch breaks. First up, I'd really like to thank the Sustainable Business Group team, Caroline and Gabriella, who've really been putting all the hard work behind the scenes to put this session together live in front of all of you today. And Professor Emmeline Cooper, who has kindly devoted her time to mentor me with her expertise in finance. And I'm also really pleased to be joined by Rosina here, who's literally been an inspiration from day one. So today we're talking about how is it that our money can help save the planet. And I thought, what would be a better way to do it and start it than by reading off a quote by Mike Berners-Lee from his book, How Bad Are Bananas? And he writes on page 209, every time we spend or invest money, we choose one version of the future or another. On that note, we have today with us in studio Dan Sherrard-Smith, who is the founder and CEO of MotherTree, a platform that helps us understand the impact of our money, whether it is in our current accounts, savings accounts, or pensions, or even when it comes down to things like mortgages, insurance, or broadband even. Welcome, Dan. You've come a long way along in your journey as a serial entrepreneur. And your last startup, Look After My Bills, helped save £127 million in public funds and also made it to Dragon's Den. And now with MotherTree, you've been able to reduce or find routes to reduce carbon emissions by 26,000 tons. Wow, a lot of intriguing terms there, carbon emissions, metric tons. So how about we kickstart this conversation today by you helping us understand some of those terms and how do we really associate them with money? And also tell us a little bit more about MotherTree and its mission.
So I was on mute. It's a good start. Shri, thank you so much for having me. It's absolutely brilliant to be here. What a superb opening question. There's a lot to unpack in that. So you asked about carbon emissions. Well, carbon emissions are, they've been a natural process on our planet for millions of years, but it's only since the Industrial Revolution where they've become a real issue for us and the planet itself. So our energy system, our transport, all the ways we kind of power our society up until from the start of the Industrial Revolution, 1750, to up until kind of early this century, 2000, mainly came from fossil fuels, and burning fossil fuels produces carbon emissions. And the higher the carbon emissions have gone in our atmosphere, the higher our temperature has gone, which has caused the wildfires, the floods, the droughts that we've seen worldwide and in the UK as well. So in terms of you asked about what's a metric ton of carbon, I think quite a hard concept to visualize. It's a gas, so we don't see it. But if you imagine a telegraph pole, which is about 27 feet high, those poles in the street that have the electric wires on. A ton of carbon is one of those poles up, one of those poles across, and one of those poles lengthways. So that'd be a cube. That's a metric ton of carbon. To put it another way, it's about 400 bricks stacked together. So it's quite a lot. And we're producing about 40 to 50 billion tons of carbon per year. So it's a serious issue. So I think that covers your carbon point. You asked about MotherTree. So MotherTree, our mission is to make it really easy for values-led businesses, organizations, and citizens to reduce their carbon and save money. And we focus on pension banks and bills. As Sri said, my background, I was on the founding team and look after my bills. We had the best ever deal on Dragon's Den. We saved the British public £127 million in 3 years. And our goal at MotherTree is to get £1 billion into the green economy by 2025. And really coming back to Sri's point about Mike Berners-Lee and the issue of where our money goes is going to create the future. That's why I'm in this game, because where our money is going in terms of where our banks are lending money and where our pensions are invested are going to be the companies that have the most chance of thriving and continuing in our society in the next 10 to 30 years. And so really, as a citizen, it becomes a choice of, do I want my money invested in fossil fuels, tobacco, gambling, or is there another way? And that's what MotherTree is all about.
Well, thanks really, Dan, for explaining that so well and really bringing us, to the other side of understanding these terms and what context do they really mean in terms of finance. What specific services in the financial industry does MotherTree really focus on? If you could just help us understand that.
Absolutely. So when I first started MotherTree, we focused on banks and pensions, but that's expanded now to 6 key areas. So we focus on savings accounts, current accounts, pensions, investments, insurance, and energy. We look at those 6 for a couple of reasons. So first up, when we first started MotherTree, we realized that pensions and banks, 2 of the biggest drivers of the society we are going to get in the coming years. So when we first started looking at this area, I was running what's called the Climate Challenge, which is actually how I met Sri. And back then, it's about 2.5 years ago, we were looking at about 30 actions each month for individuals to live more sustainably. We went vegan for the day, we got rid of single-use plastic, we looked at our carbon footprint, lots of the actions that you kind of read in blogs and various other places that can help to reduce carbon emissions. 2 of those actions were where our bank lends money and where our pensions were invested. And it was a real shock for many of the participants on the Climate Challenge, and for me included. The first time we ran the Climate Challenge, it was new for me as well. I was one of the participants. We ran it for about groups of 8 to 10 people at a time. And I realized 2% of my pension was in oil and gas, 1% was in British American tobacco, 1% was in weapons, there was money in gambling, just areas that I'd never choose to invest in, and yet every month some of my cash had been going there. And at the same time, I look after my bills bank account. We were banking with Lloyds, and Lloyds have put £12 billion into fossil fuels since the Paris Agreement, so since 2016. So that one bank in the UK has put over £1 billion a year into fossil fuels. So that's where we really focused 2 years ago. And what we realized was shocking. So the UK's big 5 banks, Barclays, HSBC, Santander, NatWest, and Lloyds, kind of most recognizable brands in the UK in terms of banks before the neobanks came out. Those 5 banks put £29 billion into fossil fuels in 2022. And it gets a bit worse. The world's 60 biggest banks, which includes those 5 banks, they put 50 times more into fossil fuel expansion than the fossil fuel companies. So to put that a different way, for every pound that BP and Shell put to fossil fuel expansion, the banks put £50. So it has a colossal impact on the society we are getting and the society we are going to get. And I think Bill McKibben sums it up really well. Money is the oxygen upon which fossil fuel burns. So that's where we focused, banks and pensions. We also realized it goes beyond that. Insurance is a really interesting one. A project can have all of the funding that it needs from banks, but if it can't get insurance, that project's not going ahead. This happened in Vietnam a few years back in 2019. They had the money to put into coal mines, but the insurers said, we're not insuring this, and 90% of that money went into renewable energy in the country. So insurance has a really big impact. So we also look at insurance, and of course energy. If we can shift our energy system to a renewable system, it won't solve all the problems in terms of the climate crisis, but it will solve a big one in terms of the carbon emissions that are produced when we burn fossil fuels.
No, it's interesting really that, there are numbers out there that really tell the story. And what that brings me to understand really is, how does the consumer really make a choice today when it comes to responsible investing? Is there enough for the consumer to really be aware to make the right choices? Is there something that you can sort of, put in for us to sort of try and understand if there are resources out there, or if there is information out there for the consumer to really make this decision themselves?
Yeah, it can feel really overwhelming in terms of making a decision around finances, not only because of the sustainability angle, but simply because it's money. It can feel overwhelming. It's something that we need. We live in a capitalist society, but it can feel a bit dirty at times. So it can be an overwhelming decision. And through about 350 hours of interviews, we've summed up this sort of complex, these feelings around money as what we call the green fog. So that's FOG: frustration, overwhelm, and guilt. Because it's frustrating. It's frustrating to think, big business and politicians are not playing their part on this to make sure the system is set up for a world that we actually want to live in the next 20 to 30 years. It's frustrating to just find the time. We live busy lives, jobs or university degrees and social lives and families. It's just busy. Where does looking at our money fit into that? It's just frustrating. It's also overwhelming. And Shri, I think you really touched on this in an important way. It's overwhelming that when we do find the time, there are so many resources saying contradictory things. It's very hard to shift through the greenwash. Greenwash is when a company or a fund, an investment fund, is saying they're greener than they actually are. Mm-hmm. And then it can feel guilty. That's that sense of guilt that perhaps we're not doing enough. So we really summed up that's like how we sum up that complexity of feelings.
And
but there are resources out there. Yes, Shri, to get to your point. There are reliable resources out there that can help consumers. So one of them, kind of shameless plug, is mymothertree.com. So we will show consumers the impact of their money in terms of the carbon it's producing. So if you have £10,000 in a current account with Barclays, well, we'll show you that it produces just over 2 tons of carbon per year just by that money sitting there. Other resources you can use, bank.green is an excellent one for an overview of the bank. It'll kind of say if your bank's good or bad. Ethical Consumer is another important one, which looks at the policies behind the banks. So I would say those are the 3 sort of reliable sources that are worth checking out.
And Dan, from your own research, and since you've actually introspected and you've had your own personal journey discovering all of these resources and really understanding the world of sustainable investing, if you had to draw a perspective around what sustainable investing really means, what does it mean to you? And hopefully through that, we should be able to sort of draw some, parallels and try and understand, what sustainable investing could mean to us. So if you could explain that to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see it as a spectrum. So there's kind of traditional investing where perhaps you're investing directly in a company or in a fund, and you don't care about its impact on society. You just want to, ideally make money and manage your risk in the way that works for you. So that's kind of traditional investment. Then there's investment where we care about the impact, and we might choose that we don't want to invest in oil and gas companies and we don't want to invest in gambling. So we would remove those from our funds or from our choice of companies. Now that might have an impact on the returns available, but there's some research that we've done that actually shows you get better returns without oil and gas in the portfolio. So perhaps, Sri, we can unpack that later on. But just to finish that spectrum, then there's impact investment, which goes beyond just removing companies and into how do we ensure companies are having the biggest positive possible impacts. And that's about working with those companies. So you're investing in companies that are having a tangible, exponentially positive impact on the planet.
And I know you touched upon this a little earlier in our conversation, but if we look at the other side of the table, do you think the financial services industry is really doing enough to empower the consumer with the information that they need to make a right choice? And do you really think that they're doing enough, or there's definitely scope for improvement? What would you say about that?
Well, there's always scope for improvement, but I also think there are some fantastic fintechs out there really rooting for the consumer, making sure citizens take an informed choice. An example would be Tomelo and Share Action. So both of those are businesses that have built up membership bases around voting for at businesses' AGMs, so annual general meetings, where they can vote to keep these companies to account on their net zero plans, on their plans to reduce their carbon. And it's a really important way as a consumer. If we have shares in a company, we can vote and hold a business to account. So those are two resources, Tomelo and Share Action. I think there's a growing awareness, a growing movement in the UK and beyond of people who are willing to make sure their money is invested responsibly. And there are a growing number of independent financial advisors in this space who make that happen on behalf of citizens, and websites, like My Money, like My MotherTree, like Bank.Green, like Make My Money Matter, who are raising awareness of this issue and hopefully bringing some consumers along to make those informed choices.
And it'll be interesting to know, Dan, so we talk about consumers, and consumers can really look at themselves as investors, contributing to developing the future trends of this industry, possibly. But are there any other stakeholders you think who would be really crucial in terms of the role that they play in setting really the course or the path in the future for this industry? And is there any piece of advice that you would want to leave them with in terms of what they could do to really try and see how this industry could be a little more inclusive and hopefully be completely different from where we see it today as? And if you could sort of shed some light on what you think about this.
So I think there's three key things consumers can do when it comes to our money. The first is get informed. Make sure you're clear what your money is actually doing, and are you okay with that impact? Is your pension, is your bank investing in fossil fuels, and are you okay with that happening? So get informed is the first. The second is lobby. If you're with, let's say, Barclays, who are the worst bank in the UK for investing in fossil fuels, they put between 10 and 15 billion pounds into fossil fuels every single year. So if you have an account with Barclays, but you want to keep that account, well then lobby. You can write to the chairman. His name is Nigel Higgins. I've done this when I was with Barclays. I'm no longer with them because I've been on this journey. You can write to the chairman and the CEOs of these companies to say why you do not accept their policies around fossil fuels. Now, when I wrote to Nigel Higgins, he wrote his climate team wrote back with a 4,000-word essay about their plans for 2050, which is simply not good enough. Nigel Higgins will be 97 in 2050. It's not going to be his problem. So the third thing we can do is make it his problem, which is by speaking his language, which means moving our business away from Barclays, moving our money out of Barclays, and telling him why we're doing that. So get informed, lobby, and move are the three big things as citizens that we can do to change this.
And do you think there could be any other stakeholders really who would be important or who would emerge as important in the near future?
So in terms of stakeholders, I think we have, clearly the regulatory system needs to start to support this. So that's a very important one. The FCA, I'm not sure they'll completely go for it, but that is one part. The other part of the regulatory system is how we report on these things. So businesses currently, if you're a certain size of business, you have to report on scope 1, 2, and 3, which is kind of like the carbon emissions from your employees, from your main activities, but also from your supply chain, so the providers that you use. Now, there's talk in 2026 of also including our financed emissions, and that would be huge because our financed emissions make up over 50% of most businesses' carbon footprints. I'll give you two examples. One is Google. So Google hold $130 billion in their bank accounts. It's for paying employees, it's for acquiring other companies, it's for tax purposes. And based on how those banks are investing, that money has a carbon footprint, and that carbon footprint is twice as big as all the other Google and parent company Alphabet and their supply chain activities put together. So that includes their databases, all of those things. The money carbon footprint is twice as big. And when we look at the average UK business, which has 10 employees, the average UK business produces 75 tons of carbon per year. When you add in their bank, it adds another 75 tons. So it doubles the footprint. It's a very similar impact for the average size business. So that's another really important stakeholder. We need to make sure the regulation supports it, that policy is bringing in increased transparency around this, but also that businesses and consumers are willing to take responsibility about this issue.
Yeah, I think very rightly put across as, in order to sort of take in some power in making those decisions, there's also some responsibility that we need to own ourselves in order to make sure that, we see the kind of changes that we want to see in the industry. So thank you, Dan, for really pointing that out. I think we should have some questions.
We do have some questions.
Now.
I was going to ask whether we can ask some questions.
Yes.
So I'll ask a couple of questions, Dan, if that's okay, on the inform part. So Nikki said she has actually already moved her pension to an impact investment fund, but her advisor only offered one choice. So she wants to know, is there any way you can go? She wants to know whether she got a good choice now she's moved it, but is there any way you can go to have a look for yourself about the different funds that might be on offer, so you can make an informed decision for yourself?
Firstly, it's great that you've made the jump. That's a really important move. There are places to see. You can actually do this research yourself to see where the fund's actually invested, and then also where other funds are invested. So there's places like TrustNet. If you just put it into a Google, or ideally Ecosia, which plant trees when you search. But TrustNet is a site where you can then put in your fund's name, and it'll show you where that fund is being invested. It'll show you the top 10 companies that it's invested in. So that can kind of peel back the lid. So we also do this. We do this for employees, where we look at all of the businesses, all of the companies that a fund is invested in. So we get kind of that clarity on it. In terms of the actual investment advice, so I can't offer investment advice on that side, but what I would say is if you're concerned that you're not getting the choices that you want, and there's definitely more than just one fund, so I find that slightly odd. It's well worth going to talk to some other independent financial advisors to make sure you're getting the information that's broader than just one fund. And a couple of them, Mindful Wealth, run by the brilliant Jay Street, Switchfoot, run by Seb, whose surname escapes me right now, and one called The Path. So you don't have to reach out to those, but there are independent financial advisors in the market who are able to look at broader than just one impact fund to make sure your money has the right risk level, is getting the returns you want, but is also invested in the places you want to see thrive.
Great. So I think we should probably try and capture a list of these resources, Sri, at the end to share with the people who have taken part. So we'll do that. Another question from Danielle about bank accounts now. What are the key points to look out for when you're looking to use a bank account, particularly for students who have not got much to invest, but they want to make sure that what they do have to invest is invested in the right way? Key questions?
Danielle, it's a great question. Even if you have just £1 to put in a bank, it makes a difference because it sends a signal. So even if there's not much money, it definitely sends a signal to the bank. In terms of things to consider when switching, so first is, does the bank functionally work for you? Which it could be, you really want an app-based bank. It could be that you want an in-branch bank, so you can go physically and sort of, pay money in, pay checks in. It could be that it's got a really good phone service. Ultimately, that bank has to work for you. And I've been on this journey. So, I have a little bit of money in Triodos. They are a brilliant bank for making sure they're lending really sustainably, but actually their customer experience in terms of the app isn't that great. And they've said that themselves. So you do have to sort of weigh this up sometimes. So, does it functionally work for what you need and what you expect from your banking provider? Then there's that, where is the bank lending the money? What's the actual impact of that bank, which is the part that, my MotherTree and others fill in. So is it investing? Is it lending money in a way that really is aligned to your values? And again, getting clarity there is important. But then also there's the question of interest rates and returns. And even with just a little bit of money, if you can lock that away and get a better interest rate, earn some money on your money, then that's also well worth considering. But those would be the main 3 points that I would say.
Thanks, Dan.
Rashina, I appreciate there were 3 parts to that question, and I'm conscious I probably have only answered 2 of them. So if I forgot one part, please let me know.
I think you covered that, and that also responds to Derek's question, which is, can you only really make an impact with higher levels of investment? And as you're saying, no, you can send a signal regardless of how much money you've got to put to one side. So a question from me. I did try the MotherTree platform. I was very impressed. I've got experience of trying to get people to switch to more energy efficient tariffs, for example. And a big problem there is inertia. You want to do it. It goes to the bottom of your to-do list. It's fiddly. How can MotherTree help with that? Do a plug. How do you make it easier for customers to do something that can easily slip to the bottom of your to-do list?
Thank you, Rashina. I really hear you on that. And it can slip to the bottom. We have busy lives. We have lots of other things we want to do, and switching banks, switching energy is pretty boring and can slip down the list. And that's exactly why we ran Look After My Bills, to get people to better energy companies, and it's exactly why we built MotherTree, to get people to better banks. And so what we do is we take time to understand you, although it doesn't take you that long. We have a system in the background to really understand that, and we run what's called our MPS method. So that's measure, prioritize, switch. So first up, we measure where you currently are. What's your bank doing in terms of the service it's providing? What's the interest rate you're getting on it? And what are your values? Is it investing in line with what you want to stand for? Then we can prioritize. We look at all of market, completely independent. We don't take any commission. Are there banks out there that are going to save you money, a better interest rate, that are going to align to what you need from the bank, but are also crucially going to be investing in areas that you want to see thrive over the coming years? So that'll be that kind of plan, that prioritization piece. And then we can move to the S of MPS, which is switch. So we support you on that switch journey. Often we can do a lot of that heavy lifting for you, saving you time. Sometimes it's just about that project management piece. It depends on the connection with the bank, but ultimately making it as smooth as possible for you to switch and get to a bank that actually fits with your lifestyle.
But you still have to change all your direct debits, I presume, Dan?
So there's a system called the Current Account Switch Service, CASS, which does that for you. So provided the bank is signed up to CASS, and all of the major banks and most of the minor ones are as well signed up to that, they will do that for you. This is the best thing about bank switching. It's as easy as it's ever been. So, all you have to do is tell the new bank that you want to switch your direct debits over. You fill in a form, takes about 2 minutes, and then within 5 working days, that should have all switched over. They do all your direct debits, all your standing orders, all of that stuff. It's very, very smooth, actually, and just not a service that's very well known.
Great, thank you.
Oh, I had a question actually, one more. So I'm sure that you would have compared the UK's pension industry really with other countries or other geographies. And what would you comment on what you see as probably things that they do better than the other geographies and things that they're not doing that well? If you could just talk about that a little.
Yeah, so we're global in our work, especially for businesses. So we've looked at quite a few pensions around the world. To start in the UK, so all of the UK major pension providers continue to allow investment in fossil fuels. Nest is the only one that's announced that it will start to divest and is doing that. It's a good move, but it hasn't got to the full divestment to my knowledge so far. So the UK is doing okay. Ireland was the first country to announce that it will fully divest, and it did that in 2018. So it's very, very ahead of the curve in that sense. So Ireland is probably the leader in this space. Japan is making big strides on that as well. America, the US is probably the laggard. Their policies are it's obviously it's more state driven than at a country level, but a lot of the states are starting to ban things like considering investment because of the sustainability impact. They say you only look at returns, which is a disaster. So the US is probably the worst place.
Can I interject with a question that's relevant?
Yeah.
Sri, if that's
Yeah.
okay. So Craig was asking, in your opinion, what's a realistic transition time frame for pensions to move towards divestment and avoid stranded assets?
I love this question,
yeah.
Craig. So was there a little bit more?
No.
Yeah. So there's 37 trillion pounds invested in pensions globally. I have to get my figure right. It's about 7% of the global economy. So it's a huge lever that we have to change course. What's a realistic timeline? So as an individual, a realistic timeline is a couple of weeks. It's a couple of weeks, do the research, figure out what really works for you, talk to an expert and get it done. And then once it's done, it can just sit there in the background. So for an individual, it's that. At a systems level, realistic timeline is probably within a decade. And I might sound too optimistic on that, but I really don't think I am. The blockers to this are politicians, fossil fuel companies, and companies receiving money from pensions that are not doing good for our society. That is just human will. That is our ability to get out of those companies. There's a piece around divestment that we should unpack, and Alice Ross, who writes the book Investing to Save the Planet, talks about this brilliantly. At an individual level, if we move out of a pension fund or a fund that we're invested in, somebody else with perhaps less scrupulous morals will move in to make a profit. That absolutely applies at an individual level. But when enough of us switch, when the banks stop investing in fossil fuels, that kind of money, we're talking 10 to 15 billion pounds in the case of Barclays. That kind of money is a very hard hole for these fossil fuel companies to fill. And if we're getting that money into places like renewable energy as quickly as possible within this decade, then we can start to change the course.
Thanks, Dan. Penelope's asked, her stockbroker's been talking to her about ecological funds, but that defining what ecological is tricky. Have you noticed a move towards funds defining themselves in that way, sort of ecological funds rather than impact or environmental funds?
There's definitely been this kind of divergence of fund names, which makes it even trickier to navigate. So we've seen ecological, we've seen biodiverse, we've seen climate change positive. There's lots of these different names that are coming out. It does make it hard to shift through, and it's really important that you lift back the lid on those labels. So to give you an example, we have seen and heard stories of many funds that have been labeled as ESG, so good for the environment, good socially, and good for their governance. and yet it's just a label. The manager of the fund just said whack a label on it and keep selling it, even though it's got fossil fuel businesses in there. So a label is only a kind of indicator at best. It's really important to go a bit deeper and see what's actually in that fund if possible.
Thank you, good advice, Dan. And a question for me is, how do banks feel about you, as in MotherTree, the platform? Because I know you don't, I assume you don't have a direct relationship with them in order to get the data. Are some banks responding more positively than others? And are you seeing that your place, what your service in the marketplace is actually having an impact on them, because they can see that there's much more transparency and comparability?
It's a spectrum. So there are banks that are willing to engage with us, and those are, the greenest banks. They want this information out in the public domain, and also the banks that are more progressive and are actively reducing their investment in fossil fuels. And then there are banks that simply don't engage, like Barclays and HSBC. The truth is, we're too small. We're not even a fly in their ointment at the moment, but that's okay. We will continue growing this. So it's a spectrum. We have also seen impact here already. So last year Christian Aid switched out of Barclays. Cambridge University have announced that they will switch out of Barclays. They've been with Barclays for 200 years, so that's a really important move. So we're starting to see, and we know that happened because students had our bank league table in their hands saying we want to switch. We no longer agree with Barclays as our bank for the university. So we are starting to see impact here, which is really encouraging. But it's definitely a spectrum, and most of the banks that invest in fossil fuels are not engaging, but that's okay. We get data from other places.
That's data in itself.
Yes, it absolutely is.
Okay, so a couple of questions, general questions. What is the actual carbon impact of a typical average current account holding £10,000 in the UK? I'd really like, because you talked about these kind of multipliers of emissions, but can you just give us a feel for the impact of £10,000?
Yeah, so the average household keeps about £12,500 in the current account. So £10,000, just below the average. And £10,000 held with Barclays produces just over 2 tons of carbon per year. And that's because of how Barclays are investing, so where they're lending money to. Whereas switching to a greener bank like Nationwide or Triodos produces less than a ton, actually produces about 0.3 tons per year. So you can remove about 2 tons just by switching bank.
Thank you. That's really useful to be able to put a scale on that. Another one, or have you got another one?
No, go
I
ahead.
can carry on.
Yeah.
Okay. I know we've got quite a lot of students on the call who are looking at this from an individual perspective. So coming back to the discussion you were having earlier about the climate crisis work that you've done, what are the 2 most impactful things that an individual can do to address the climate crisis? So I know we can get caught up with FOG. I love that acronym. How can we break through the fog and take action and know that we're doing something that's the most impactful thing?
Well, a kind of shameless plug would be move the bank and the pension, but there are other pieces. I think the other one that has a really big impact is influencing others. So just talking about this in a way that encourages others to think about what's going on. And Catherine Hayhoe has a brilliant TED talk about how to engage on that. So absolutely recommend watching that. It's just kind of 7-8 minutes long, but how to address it in an empathetic way with others, to think about, okay, what is the actual impact of our money, because it's often the biggest driver of our carbon emissions. Just to put that in perspective, for the average UK individual, we produce about 10 tons of carbon from our lifestyle. So that's what we eat, how we get around, the clothes we buy, those kind of things. And when you add in their bank and their pension, it adds another 10 tons. So for the average UK consumer, the bank and pension attributes half of their overall carbon footprint. So what are the 2 things? One is absolutely look at the bank and pension, because that has a disproportionate impact on our overall individual level, but then also to talk about it, to think about how to influence others. And the thing, Shri taking over this event is amazing. to raise awareness to it. Those kind of things have a disproportionate impact because you're influencing others along the journey.
Brilliant, thank you. Great advice, Dan. Just had another question come in about businesses approaching the bank that they use, because I know MotherTree serves individual customers and also business customers. The businesses that do work with MotherTree to look for less impactful banking, are they motivated by their values, or are they motivated by financial concerns? How are they thinking about this?
It's both, and it's also business requirements. So I'll just unpack that a little bit. So there are businesses that are out there to have the biggest positive impact they possibly can, and they're coming to MotherTree and they want to know what's going on with their bank, what's going on with their pension, and they're actively wanting to switch those things, and insurance and energy and the other parts that we do. Then there are businesses that are concerned with saving money, understandably. It's a really tough economy out there. Saving money is part of keeping the business going, so you have more capital to invest in areas like lead gen. So we do a lot of that work with businesses where we figure out where can they get the best saving possible, but that also fits their values. So we're able to save the business money. We typically save the average business about £10,000 per year. And then the other part is that it functionally works. So for the finance director, for the team, the account actually works. And crucially, systems and processes are not disrupted, which means employees can get paid on time. That would be a disaster to switch bank and actually employees can't get paid. That would be the worst case scenario. So we manage that switch on behalf of businesses to make sure that also goes as smoothly as possible.
Brilliant. So unfortunately, to go from that sort of positive note, Craig's asking a question which is taking us back to the situation in the US. And Craig's mentioning particularly West Virginia banning some banks from providing services as a result of ESG policies. Do you think it will mean an increase in green hushing?
I think it will in the US. I think it will, which is a really disappointment, because green hushing, just to unpack that term, green hushing is what happens when a company is actually doing really good things in terms of sustainability, but doesn't feel confident enough to talk about it externally. When actually, and we talked about this already, influencing others, talking about the good things we're doing is a really important part of changing the narrative and changing our society. We change because of the stories we tell. So having these companies making these positive changes is a really important piece. So it's very, very disappointing to see what's going on in states like West Virginia. But actually, I do think there's really positive things happening in the States and beyond in terms of companies actually willing to stand up and take leadership here. The best thing is all of the companies we've seen that have taken leadership on this have actually brought in more customers. So to give you a couple of examples, Patagonia last year announced that all profits would go to saving the planet. Their sales went up after that. It's fantastic. Yeah. And we work with a lot of businesses to position them so that they can walk the walk, so they have confidence to avoid the green hushing and then to actually talk about it externally. And we've seen that brings in more clients and it leads to happier employees as well. So it's just good business by making sure it's set up sustainably.
Absolutely. It's insane to think it's an either or rather than a mutually enhancing value creation step. Absolutely. I think that's coming towards the end of the questions. So those of you in the audience, there's a few more minutes if you've got a couple of last questions to ask. Shri?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that we spoke about green hushing, and is there enough communication going out from banks or pension service providers about going green? I just wondered if there's something that you've come across and something that you found interesting in particular or inspiring that that we could also sort of know about.
So I don't think banks and pension providers are doing enough in this space. I actually think most of the big players don't want to talk about this. They don't want to know, and they don't want us to know where they're investing. They think that's their game and nobody else should be involved. I fundamentally disagree. What is inspiring me, or was the question sort of what's inspiring that I've seen?
Anything that you've seen that's particularly inspiring that you think should lead the way for others in the industry to take on?
So the thing that I'm most inspired by are the businesses that are willing to take action on this. I'll give you a few examples. There's an amazing business called Greener and Cleaner down in Bromley in London, led by a brilliant founder called Carissa Wright. And they have shops, so physical shops where you can go and you can fix your clothes as part of the community. They work on upcycling. I just think it's such a magnificent model in terms of that renewable and recycling part. And she's also then working to make sure the finances support that or are in line with that. Another business that I absolutely love working with is called Quick Fox Labs, who are a digital marketing agency run by two female founders, Emma and Amy. Emma and Amy, they had about 15 years each in their own separate careers and never had a female boss between them, which is just ludicrous. And they recruit out of prisons and out of foster care. So their whole business is about equality and social mobility and equal pay. And when we looked at their bank was investing billions into all white male boards, all white male C-suites, into prison systems that didn't allow for the successful reintegration of citizens. And so we switched their bank, we saved the money, we reduced the carbon. But the thing Emma and Amy got most value out of is now they know their bank invests proportionally more into diverse leadership teams and also into prison systems that allow for the successful reintegration of citizens. So there are things that we can do that really support incredible businesses, and that's where I take most inspiration, is working with fantastic founders and citizens who want to do the right thing, but also, financially want to make sure it works for them as well, so that it's a win-win.
So the call for last questions has brought in a couple more, Dan, of people looking for specific advice with their situations, if you don't mind. So Penelope is a trustee of a local community centre with 60,000 turnover. That's a successful community centre. And she's trying to, her trustees are wary of them moving away from Barclays because that's where they've always banked, and isn't it going to be a big hassle? Any advice for Penelope?
Yeah, Penelope, this is such an important question. And we hear this time and time again from charities and businesses with boards where the board can be a bit of a stickler. And actually, this is the biggest challenge that we've come across with the charities we work with, is getting the board on side. So Penelope, please do reach out if you want to have a chat about that, because that is the crucial part. Once the board is on side and they see the benefits, then actually everything else is pretty straightforward. But it's a very hard argument to get across because it can be a bit like herding cats. But we work with lots of charities to make that happen. I've talked about a few of the benefits already. So for trustees, what we typically find is a couple of things. One is Barclays or some of the other big banks, they know them. So there's that trust factor, they know the brand, and there's a worry of what if we go to a brand or a bank that we don't know and puts our money at risk. There's also this sense of we're making money and it works, let's not rock the boat. And there's also a sense of it's just not top of our priority list. So addressing those three things is really important. But we can do that. We as you know, Penelope, from this talk, there are banks out there that are robust financially, can cover the risk, but also can deliver a better financial performance, and also make sure that it isn't taking up the charity's time, and crucially can actually help keep money in the local community. And Penelope, for your case, that's a really important part. We can make sure that the bank is actually investing back into that local community, not just spending money and investing in the US or the EU or further away. So it can also really help the local community. But that's such an important issue to address, is getting the trustees on side.
I think that's a really important message that Dan's getting across there, is that your money can not just do less bad, it can actually do good in the areas that are particularly important to you, as Dan mentioned, whether that's includes in diverse workforces or investing in the local community. So I think you can really take it from being less destructive to actually productive and regenerative use of your money. So Penelope, take Dan up on that offer of support, and then Tim's asking, where can we find a ranking of the CO2 impact of banks so that we can compare them? I think that's on MotherTree, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. That's I don't know, Tim, but that's a great question, because there is a resource on MotherTree. We publish a bank league table yearly, which shows the rankings of the bank in terms of the impact of carbon if an individual had £10,000 with each of those banks. So I don't know if
So
there's going to be
go
a kind
and
of
have a
resource
look.
list.
Yeah, we will definitely do a resource list. And Anna's just added she used bank.green, which she also recommended as a resource to switch her account to Nationwide, and was really pleased with the service. It was easy, and the new bank's providing a good service. So it's nice to hear some testimonials that it is doable, it is easy, and you can end up in a better situation than you were before.
Yeah, it's great to hear.
Great. I think that brings us to the end of this, really. And fantastic, Dan. This has just been an eye-opener. And I think only time will tell how the world of sustainable investing will really shape up and evolve. But for all of us today, I think with Dan's advice, we can really see ourselves as investors and know about the role that we could play in shaping the industry. I would also encourage you all to actually go to the website and check out the carbon money calculator, which will help you understand the impact of the financial decisions you're making today. And thank you so much, Dan, for spending time with us today, taking us to the other side of understanding the role that we could add to, and sort of how we could bring in value in contributing in the development of the sector. And I'm sure each one of us can now go out and win this in our favor, and also smile a little and be proud of what we've learned today. Thank you again for being with us. Thank you, Rosina.
So yeah, just wanted to join Sri in thanking Dan very much for being such a insightful and educating guest, and for Sri for being such a brilliant host of today's event. And I think the thing that stuck for me is whether you're a business or an individual, your carbon impact of your money is basically the same as your carbon impact of everything else. So you can either double your carbon impact, or you can work towards cutting that by half by making the right decisions. And don't forget, we all have agency to drive change, whether we think that we're only investing £1 or we're running businesses where we're investing £60,000. Your voice and what you do counts. And as more of us do that, that adds up to more action and impact. So use what you've learned today and make those changes before they slip down the to-do list. So just wanted to wrap up by saying thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much to those joining us live. Thanks to those who are watching this as a recording. Our next Sustainability Network Speaker Series event is focused on biodiversity. So the title of the talk is Biodiversity's Nature's Gift to Business ? And that takes place on campus and online on June the 19th. So look out for more information about that event. Thank you again for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully see you again at a future event. Thank you.